Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Brandon Williams. Today, I will be presenting my honors thesis titled An Empirical Analysis of Economic Inequality on Economic Growth. My honors thesis advisor is Dr. Greenlaw, and I would like to thank him for his comments and support along the way. For the United States, one of the most important trends of concern is the growing level of inequality. It is widely accepted that the United States is currently experiencing historical high levels of economic inequality. To measure inequality, economists use the Gini coefficient. In the figure below, the Gini coefficient is depicted from 1947 to 2019 and is measured as the income Gini ratio of families by race of householder, all races. As can be seen in the figure, the United States is currently experiencing a high level of income inequality. There are three different theories for the relationship between economic inequality and economic growth: supply side, demand side, and what is referred to as the political economy. My research explores the supply side theory. It has been widely established that inequality has a negative impact on undermining educational opportunities, lowering social mobility, hampering skills development, and less productive labor inputs. It is important to note that the supply side theory is not a zero-sum game. In other words, just because an individual in a low socioeconomic class cannot go to college does not mean that someone in a higher socioeconomic class will go to college. Most of the research has studied the extent to which higher inequality is associated with less opportunity and mobility. However, I aim to study if there is a causal linkage between higher inequality and slower macroeconomic growth. My main research question is to what extent does or does not human capital accumulation explain the relationship between income inequality and economic growth? My hypothesis is that inequality limits human capital accumulation, primarily through the channel of educational attainment, which then dampens labor quality. Reductions in labor quality lead to slower economic growth. My contribution is that I examine the impact of income inequality on labor quality. One of the most important demographics of labor quality is educational attainment, as education allows for individuals to grow their skills and increase their opportunities. Equally as important, experience, as proxied by age, can also increase one's human capital. Chow, Mengzi, Xi Sang investigate the growth of labor quality on Taiwan's economic growth, and conclude that the growth of labor quality impacts economic growth more than capital investment. In addition, the researchers also find that the main demographic trends are the growth in educational attainment and experience. Vandenberger finds evidence that better educated and older or more experienced workers are more productive than their less educated, younger, or less experienced counterparts. Another important trend of labor quality is the role of gender and ethnicity. During the second half of the 20th century, the composition of the labor force saw an increase in the number of female workers. More importantly, during the same time period, educational attainment for women also increased. However, Sanguino and Bronstein find that this educational equality did not translate to equality in employment. The authors find a negative relationship between gender job segregation and labor's share of income. Despite an increase in employment participation by women, women are relatively rare in high-skilled jobs compared to their male counterparts. Because there is a discrepancy between high and low-skilled jobs, between males and females, gender can dampen labor quality. Weinberger finds that there is a strong evidence to suggest that within the market for recent college graduates, there is discrimination among different ethnic groups and females when compared to white males. Lastly, the fluctuations in the business cycle can bring about more transient changes. For example, the workforce tends to become more experienced in recessions because older and more experienced workers are less likely to lose their jobs than their younger and less experienced counterparts. DeRose supports this notion that employers hire more experienced workers than less experienced workers during recessions. Aronson and Sullivan and Fernald aim to examine the economy's potential rate of growth. Aronson and Sullivan provide insights on the improvement in labor quality due to changes in the distribution of education and worker experience. Fernald provides historical and recent observations of the dynamics of productivity and potential output. In his report, Bernstein states that there is solid theoretical backing, however little empirical evidence. This is what I hope to provide. My economic theory is that as inequality increases, human capital accumulation decreases through decreases in educational attainment. This decrease in human capital accumulation presents itself as a weaker form of labor quality. Finally, reductions in labor quality dampen economic growth. Labor quality is defined as the ratio of labor inputs to hours. The growth rate captures the productive benefits of changes in the composition of hours worked. Generally, the growth rate is defined as the sum of growth in hours and growth in labor quality. As can be seen in the prior literature, it is important to capture the changes of the composition of the workforce. Demographics such as educational attainment, gender, and experience of the workforce must be included in the regression equation. Lastly, business cycles must also be captured, as older and more experienced workers are less likely to lose their jobs during recessions than their younger and less experienced counterparts. The first equation is useful in order to determine if economic inequality decreases the educational attainment in the United States. It is expected that Gini will have a negative sign. The next equation uses labor quality, which is derived of changes in the composition of the workforce, such as certain demographics and the behavior of the business cycle. From the work of Aronson and Sullivan, Chow, Mengsi, and Ji Sang, and Vandenberg, the regression equation must capture the level of experience and educational attainment in the economy. Furthermore, Aronson and Sullivan discuss the importance of measuring gender in the composition of labor quality. Seguino and Bronstein find evidence of gender job segregation. In essence, the second equation is derived from the previous literature. The sign of Gini is expected to be negative, whereas the sign of education is expected to be positive. Next, the sign of gender is expected to be negative for females and positive for males. Lastly, the sign for age is expected to be positive for older workers and negative for younger workers. Once this empirical relationship is established, it is hypothesized that inequality dampens economic growth through labor quality. The sign of labor quality is expected to be positive, whereas the sign for cycles is expected to be negative. To measure labor quality, this paper uses the measurement provided by John Fernald. Fernald measures labor quality from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Aronson and Sullivan approximation. The variable for educational attainment and Gini coefficient is obtained from the U.S. Census Bureau, whereas the variable for experience, gender, and employment is collected from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Gini coefficient is measured as the income Gini ratio of families by race of household for all races. The educational attainment variable is defined as the percent of people 25 years and older who have completed 4 years or more of college. The experience variable is a ratio between the employment level of 16 to 24-year-olds and 55 years and older against the employment level of 16 years and older. The gender variable is defined as the labor force participation rate by females and males. Lastly, the variable for economic growth is measured as the annual percentage change in real GDP, whereas the cycles variable is measured as the unemployment rate. The first and second equation use a sample period from 1964 to 2019, whereas the third equation uses a sample period from 1948 to 2019. The results for the first equation are depicted on the right side. It is important to note that the p-values are in the parentheses. The relationship between the Gini coefficient and educational attainment is positive and statistically significant. For a 1 percentage point increase in the income Gini ratio, educational attainment increases by about 2%. This is contradictory to the literature review and economic theory. A potential explanation is that the model is too simplistic and that the annual time series does not provide enough variation in order to capture the true effects of the relationship. The results for the second equation are depicted on the right side. It is important to note that the p-values are in the parentheses. The most important result is that the Gini coefficient is statistically significant and negative. This result provides evidence that the Gini coefficient decreases labor quality. For the control variables, all of the variables have their expected signs except for age old, gender men, and gender women. Age old has a negative sign. Intuitively, this result does not make sense as an older worker has more experience and more knowledge, so it is expected that the worker has a larger human capital accumulation. A potential explanation is that experience increases with age, but at a decreasing rate. Furthermore, Aronson and Sullivan expect to find a change in experience levels that turn from a positive to a negative factor for labor quality growth. Furthermore, men and women are statistically significant and have their opposite signs. Intuitively, these signs do not make sense as Aronson and Sullivan and Sanguine and Bronstein have established that women tend to earn lower wages despite having the same level of education and experience as their male counterparts. Although Aronson and Sullivan do mention that this negative effect on labor quality is diminishing over time as the share of women workers grows. However, the size of the coefficient estimates as well as the difference between the coefficients seem rather large. There is neither serocorrelation nor heteroscedasticity depicted within the regression. However, the issue of multicollinearity does arise. Since the variables are statistically significant, any remedies will lower their t-scores and not change their estimated coefficients. Thus, I decided not to address the collinearity in the regression. The results for the third equation are depicted on the right side. It is important to note that the p-values are in the parentheses. Labor quality and unemployment are statistically significant and negative. The results for the labor quality do not have its intended sign. This result is contradictory and does not support the hypothesis that inequality dampens economic growth through labor quality. Lastly, there is neither serocorrelation, multicollinearity, nor heteroscedasticity detected within the regression. There are numerous reasons for policymakers and citizens to be concerned about the rising level of inequality, such as its impact on the basic American social contract that says hard work pays off, the diminishing of opportunity, the rise in social unrest, and its impact on political functionality. Ultimately, the results do not support the theory that economic inequality dampens economic growth. The main issue that arises is that economic inequality does not have a negative relationship with educational attainment, and that labor equality does not have a positive relationship with economic growth. One suggestion is to use disaggregate data rather than aggregate data, as some of the variation between the relationships are lost when conducting analysis in the aggregate. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I will be happy to take any questions.